The House of the Dragon has seen HBO again reach into the bag of fantasy tricks in George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series. While the show adapts a historical event from that universe, this story was a lot more complicated to adapt than most books. In this video, we'll discuss what makes this story special and how that plays out in the show. First up, the truth is uncertain. Let us explain. So in George R.R. Martin's literary universe, characters learn about history from the books by historians. So far, so good. But like in the real world, the further back in time you go, the less clear the picture gets. This affects the in-universe record of the war known as the Dance of the Dragons, whose seeds were planted around 200 years before the events of the books. The story of the dance is laid out in the pages of Fire and Blood, which is also considered the source material for House of the Dragon, but that story blends details from 4 different historical sources. One was the account written by Grand Maester Orwell, who was Team Green all the way, and Grand Maester Monk polished his account. While any information is useful, these 2 histories are riddled with inaccuracies. Another version of the tale comes from Septon Eustace, who served at the Red Keep during King Viserys' final days, and while it's slightly more accurate, it too has a green bias. The 4th source comes from the Court Fool Mushroom, who is part of Team Black. Because people don't expect much from a fool, people speak quite freely around Mushroom, which would make the testimony of Mushroom the most accurate version of the story. Moving on, the show presents an unbiased story. What you see in HBO's show is the true reality of what happened. No information is lost to time, and there's no room for bias beside any biases that the writers have. This is something that the writers' room is keenly aware of. Sarah Hess, writer and executive producer of the show, explained to Collider how the show uses its relationship with the post-mortem historical accounts to say something about how history is recorded and remembered in the real world. Up next, the first thing is that the show isn't beholden to the books. While we all love George's writing, there's always room for improvement. But when HBO was changing things from the books in Game of Thrones, each of those changes was considered to be a big deal. That isn't the case in House of the Dragon, because the fact is that no one can say that the show is wrong about anything. There are loads of examples of this scattered throughout the show. Key events play out differently. For example, Kristen Cole beat the Knight of Kisses at a celebratory dinner instead of a tourney, but even the characters in the show are presented differently. For example, while King Viserys is considered in the historical accounts to be a wise and generous ruler who reigned over the best days of the Targaryen dynasty, the show reveals him to be weak and conflict-averse. One of the show's best changes is in the relationship between Rhaenyra and Alicent. While the 2 girls who would someday clash so bitterly have no relationship in the book, we see in the show that they have a close friendship that borders on romance. Ultimately, the show's account is correct, but that's besides the point. We're just here for a good story. Coming up, writing history also allowed the production to explore a key theme of the show. A core theme of House of the Dragon is the status that noble women held in the royal courts of Westeros, which the courts of medieval Europe inspire. After all, the Dance of the Dragons was ultimately a war between 2 women in a society that treats women as second-class citizens, and the element of history is also a factor in how the show presents its themes. We talked about the 4 historical accounts of the Dance of the Dragons. Notice something in common between all 4 of them? That's right, all of them were written by men. That might be why Viserys is given such a generous portrayal in their writing, while Rhaenyra and Alicent are treated as demons whose war brutalized Westeros. You can see a smaller scale example of this in the first season's 4th episode. We see Rhaenyra, who's been crushing on her uncle Daemon this whole time, go on a late-night sojourn through the streets of King's Landing. The scene climaxes with an almost climax between the characters. While this is a case of an older man taking advantage of his niece, that's not what spreads through the grapevine at court. Very much needed little encouragement to send his brother packing, but literally everyone else was madder at Rhaenyra for having out of wedlock. Now we wonder what else we can expect as the show continues. At the time of this video, the dance is only just beginning in Westeros. One thing you can't accuse historians of is a lack of attention to detail. The events of the conflict are portrayed comprehensively, but as HBO is showing us, those historians were wrong about many things. Book readers will know the broad strokes of the war, but they're prepared now to see the people involved painted in shades of gray. Who knows what that might entail? Maybe the story isn't about Rhaenyra and Alicent, but they were found guilty by association. We see signs of that already in the show, where the animosity between their kids is plenty to touch off a conflict without their moms doing anything. Which things were exaggerated? What were things downplayed? What were the histories just flat out wrong? George R.R. Martin thinks they'll need 4 seasons of 10 episodes to do justice to the story, and it'll be more exciting than a roller coaster ride on a dragon. And it might be fun to revisit Fire and Blood once the show is over and see how the historical record ultimately differed from the truth. Now in other news, first, here's a preview of the next episode. We bid farewell to King Viserys, the first of his name. He wasn't the strongest-willed man to ever sit on the Iron Throne, but he had good intentions and pulled off a second win to rule in favor of his daughter one last time. While we, the audience, will miss him, the show's characters have other things to do. Alicent, who almost quit the Game of Thrones, accidentally received some top-secret information that will pull her back into the game. As the king's wife, she'll be the first to know of his passing, giving her a head start on the shenanigans. Though she all but disowned her son Aegon the Elder earlier, she's now under the misconception that his butt needs to be on the throne for the good of the realm. Rhaenyra, on the other hand, has sent her kids home, the better to protect her from assassination or something. But but she's still a complication for Allison and her Green Council. Giving her the slip for as long as possible will be the driving narrative of the episode. Speaking of Allison's squad, the episode is titled The Green Council and will air on Sunday night on HBO or HBO Max near you. Up next, let's compare the ratings. The Rings of Power wrapped up its first season a little faster than House of the Dragon, giving HBO another 2 weeks to dominate the genre of fantasy TV. Not that they needed the Rings of Power to step aside, since the House of the Dragon was handedly winning that contest already. Interestingly, streaming viewership of Rings was slightly higher than Dragon, while live viewings of the latter show put it over the top. Regarding demographics, House of the Dragon is doing a better job of capturing the 18 to 49 age group, which makes up 68% of that show's audience. The Rings of Power, on the other hand, seem to be favored by older audiences, with 71% of its viewers over 35 years old. But there's a pretty strong overlap between the two. A whopping 34% of audiences are watching both of these shows. Who says you have to pick one or the other, right? And finally, Emma Darcy opens up about working with Matt Smith. There's a reason why Smith regularly lands fan-favorite roles. He's just a joy to watch and a joy to work with. His co-star Emma Darcy gave the impression as she talked about her experience working with him. She's super grateful to the actor, who's more experienced than her, for being a mentor. He's been guiding her through the challenges of acting in an intense environment and dealing with the pressure that comes with it. Their friendship translates on screen as chemistry so strong that it convinces us to be okay with an uncle and niece being married. That's it for this video. We'd love to hear from book readers about the changes the show is making and its direction with the story. Also, what else would you guys want to see changed? Let us know in the comment section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.